let's join together in the words Havana Shira. That was so beautiful, Jacob. We're so happy to have you back in town. Hava, Havana Shira, Shir Hallelujah, Shir Hallelujah. 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 Hava, Havana Shir Hallelujah, Shir Hallelujah. Hava, Havana Shir Hallelujah, Shir Hallelujah. Hava, Havana Shira, Shir Hallelujah, Shir Hallelujah. Hava, Havana Shira, Shir Hallelujah, Shir Hallelujah.
Shabbat Shalom, Erev Tov. It's so nice to be with people on Shabbat, even if we're just here while we're streaming. It's a special delight to be joined by our guest volunteer musicians, Danny Scher and Jacob Richter, home from college. My name is Rabbi John Prosnet, also with Rabbi Jeremy Morrison and Cantor Jamie Spall on this Shabbat evening. Wherever you are tuning in across the state or across the country, I invite you to just take a deep breath. Let the spirit of Shabbat flow into you, into your rooms, your living rooms, or your kitchens. Do it one more time. And we'll sing the opening words, bringing in the light of Shabbat. You'll see it on the slide.
Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. We light the lights of Shabbat. Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. Lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat shalom. May you have a peaceful day. Shabbat shalom. May you have a restful day. Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. We light the lights of Shabbat. Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. Lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat shalom. As we watch the candles shine. Shabbat shalom. Cover the challah, pour the wine. Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. We light the lights of Shabbat. Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. Lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat shalom. Time to take a big deep breath. Shabbat Shabbat Shalom, a special day for us to rest. Bring in the light, bring in the light, bring in the light of Shabbat. We light the lights of Shabbat. Lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
We light the lights of Shabbat. We'll sing the blessing. If you have candles there in your home, I invite you to light along with me. If not, maybe you can conjure up some virtual or figurative light, the way to bring light into our dark times.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner, lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Kiddush is on page 5. If you have wine or grape juice in front of you, I invite you to lift it up along with Cantor Spall as she holds this sweetness of Shabbat. Maybe you can take an opportunity to think about where joy, even a small moment of joy in these difficult weeks, filled your week as we sing the words of Kiddush. If you're following along in our prayer book, we are on page 5.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila limikrae kodesh, zeicher l'tziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'acharta v'otanu kidasha mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava u'veratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai v'kadesh haShabbat. Amen.
How'd it taste, Cantor? All right. Not the best vintage. While we're here, I also wanted to extend a special welcome to the members of Beth Am's Introduction to Judaism class who are joining us tonight and will be joining afterwards. I admire your commitment to lifelong learning, and thank you so much for your passion and your willingness to engage with our sacred tradition. Page 20, the words of Lecha Dodi. We'll sing verses 1, 2, 5, and 9.
Shabbat. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד כי השמיענו אל המיוחד אדוני אחד ושמו אחד לשם ולתפארת ולתהילה יא לה 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 לך אדוני יא לה 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 לקראת כלה יא לילה בני שבת בני שבת נקבל אליו לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה כי מקור הברכה מראש מקדם לסוכה סוף מעשה במועד תחילה יא לה 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 לך אדוני יא לילה לקראת כלה יא לילה בני שבת נקבל אליו התעוררי כי העורף הוא באורי אורי שיר דברי כבוד אדוני עלייך נקרא יא לה 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 לך אדוני יא לילה לקראת כלה יא לילה בני שבת נקבל אליו אוי ושלום עטרת פניו גם בשמחה ובצהונה בתוך אמונה עם סגולה בואי חלה בואי חלה יא לילה יא לה 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 לך אדוני יא לה 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 לקראת כלה יא לה 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 בני שבת נקבל
There is one who sings the song of his own life, finding everything within himself. There is one who leaves the circle of herself and sings the song of her people. There is one whose voice rings with the song of humanity, hoping for the highest perfection. And there is one who rises even higher, uniting with all creatures, with all worlds, filling the universe with song. Nivarech, let us bless. Our call to prayer, page 28, Baruch Hu. Please rise if you are able. Ma'ariv Aravim, roll into dark, roll into light.
Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. The ray of the lilah, golel or mipnei choshech, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. The ray of the lilah, golel or mipnei choshech, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. Uma'avir yom u'mevi laila, umavdil ben yom u'ben laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv Aravim.
Join with me on page 33, on the bottom of the page. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol. All these things your Torah gives to us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch Ata Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Shem Kevod Malchuto, Leolam Vaed. Please be seated. Page 36. V'ahaveta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shiftecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'aderech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha u'geshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'chetavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'hisharecha Leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim lelohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem. And join us in this song of freedom, of redemption, Micha Mocha, page 40.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. מנורה תהי זו פרד אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Prayer for peace and for shelter and for love. Hashkivenu, page 42.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkivenu, Leshalom. Ve'amidenu, Shomreinu lechayim. Ufros aleinu, Sukat shlomecha. Hashkivenu, Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, leshalom. Pick one of those parts. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms.
On page 46 is the opening words to the tefillah, or the amidah, the central portion of our worship, where we say 7 different blessings on Shabbat. We'll offer the opening meditation as a community and then chant the first 3 and then have some time for silent meditation or silent prayer. If you're following along in the prayer book, we're on page 46, but if you're not following along in the prayer book, I invite you to let your mind wander. Think about places where you have found the ability to pray, the ability to meditate, the ability to think deeply. That is the message of the Amidah. If you're able, I'll ask you to please rise.
Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Adonai, Siflatai Tiftach, Ufi Hagiti Latecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la la ata Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Koneh HaKol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot V'Imahot U'Mevi Geula Livnei Bneihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah Ata Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayei HaKol Ata Rav Lehoshia Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechayei HaKol Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Michamocha Bal Gevurot Umidom Melach Melech Memit Umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman atal hachayot hakol Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh hakol Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh U'kadoshim b'chol yom yehalelucha selah Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. All the world is a very narrow bridge, but the most important thing is to not be afraid. So when the bridge seems shaky, we're going to gather ourselves up. We're going to continue across. Gesher Tzar Me'od. Kol ha'olam kulo Gesher Tzar Me'od Kol ha'olam Hu Gesher Tzar Kol ha'olam kulo Gesher Tzar Me'od Kol ha'olam Hu Gesher Ve'ha'ikar Sar Me'od.
Our prayer for healing is on page 253, the Mishaberach Lecholim. In this period of pandemic, we certainly hold in our hearts so many people who are in need of prayers for healing. Not just those who are sick with COVID-19, but those who are suffering from addiction or isolation, potentially victims of domestic violence. We know that we offer our prayers, our healing prayers to each of them. As a Beth Am community, we also are thinking of, on this Shabbat, Mason Easley, Judith Lippy, Henry Nalvin, Dale Prinstein, Maureen Roscoff, Scott Sanders, Jerry Spector, and Saul Wasserman. Let's sing the words of the prayer together.
May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mi shebeirach imotenu v'kor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of money, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
In April of this year, our speaker for tonight, Ty Gregory, joined the Jewish Community Relations Council as its 5th executive director in its 75-year history. 7 months in, Ty has directed JCRC to push for policies addressing racial and economic inequities heightened by COVID-19, launched a statewide campaign to eliminate anti-Semitism and BDS from the California Ethnic Studies curriculum, and mobilized our community in defense of Asian Americans against COVID-related racism. Ty previously served as executive director of A Wider Bridge, a partner organization of JCRC working to advance LGBTQ equality and inclusion in Israel. During his 6 years as deputy director, and later as executive director of A Wider Bridge, the organization grew from a Bay Area startup to a leading voice for Jewish and Israel inclusion in the fabric of LGBTQ and progressive America. Before A Wider Bridge, Gregory spent several years working for AIPAC in the political department. He lives in Oakland, is a graduate of UC Davis and a native of San Diego. Congregation Beth Am has had a long history of partnership with the Jewish Community Relations Council. Several of our members have served and continue to serve on its board, and its current president is Paul Resnick, who many of you know. In light of this relationship between our two institutions, and more personally, from a sense of camaraderie that emerges from the fact that he and I both began our tenures in each of our new positions in the midst of this pandemic, it is a true pleasure to welcome Ty Gregory to our virtual Bima. Ty?
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Someday we'll write interesting biographies about starting a new job in a pandemic. But Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And again, thank you, Rabbis Morrison, Prosnick, Cantor-Spall, for having me. Our bench is deep here. I want to give a shout out to our board chair, Paul Resnick, our development chair, Karen Kronik, and our treasurer, Neil Tuck, all members. Also our assembly rep, Betham's rep on JCRC's assembly, Steve Beitler. My aunt and uncle are longtime congregants, Cindy and Larry Harris, as well as some of my close family friends, Carol Justin and Jeff Greenberg. And with that many honorable mentions, I should probably thank the Academy for this Oscar. But I want to start with a story. And the first day on the job, I walk into the JCRC office. I've been there like twice since then in April. All of my staff walk into my office and they sit me down and say, Ty, we have a problem. There's this thing called ethnic studies. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's primed to be taught to almost every high school student in the state of California. And it's riddled with anti-Semitism, references to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, and includes the following rap lyrics, and I read them to you now. For every free political prisoner, an Israeli colony is expanded. For each greeting, 1,000 houses were demolished. Israelis use the press so they can manufacture, but when my sentence is judged, reality presents itself. With content like this, primed to go in front of high school students in this ethnic studies course, what is going on in our public education system? Well, let's take a step back for a minute. What's the purpose of ethnic studies? This is a 50-year fight for marginalized communities in our state who are fighting to have their story told. They're not represented accurately in history classes according to their own communities. And so this is a long time effort from the Black community, the Latino community, the Asian American community, and the Native American community to make sure that their story is told on their own terms. So with that, why is this happening? Why has our community been marginalized in this process? And there's a bigger question. Is this construct of intersectionality and progressive politics inherently anti-Semitic or hostile towards our community? Well, let's break it down. Intersectionality was a term coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw at UCLA, who argued that as a Black woman, her race and her gender identities couldn't be separated. That seems pretty reasonable when you break it down. And that translates to Jewish identity. I'll use my own personal example. As a gay Jew, when I get on a plane, I don't only have to think about which countries I can't visit for being Jewish, I also have to think about which countries are probably not a good idea to visit as a gay man. I also have to think about my behavior on the plane, whether it's wearing a Magen David or a rainbow shirt. You know, these things are all things that cross my mind, and they're not independent of one another when I'm in that same situation. It's not just me, though. When you think about Jews of color and their experiences with racial injustice in this country, this is a call to action for our Jewish community. Members of our community are facing racial injustice. We can't separate it out. It becomes a Jewish issue. So if this construct isn't the problem, what is? Well, it's not progressive politics that are the problem. It's okay that we have people all across the political spectrum in our community. The problem is Jewish exclusion from these spaces. And we've had flare-ups over the past 10 years or so in Black Lives Matter, in the women's movement, and my own personal background in the LGBT movement. I've personally been kicked out of an LGBT conference when 300 angry protesters hijacked an event that we were running with the Jerusalem Open House, the LGBT center there, chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and calling us racist Zionist pigs. So I've had my share of run-ins, and if anyone's going to be upset about the progressive movement, it's me. But it's not the problem. We have to fight for inclusion, and we have to fight for our seat at the table wherever decisions are being made. But the secret is, to the extent that we're being excluded, most of the time the problem isn't hostility or a pre-existing bias, it's lack of education. 95% of these folks have no idea what BDS is. But in order to educate them about our community and our concerns, we have to have the relationships and we have to build their trust. A great example is there's a big difference from a couple of the Black Lives Matter organizations who wrote the boycott divestment movement into their charter, and the hundreds of thousands of people enraged at the killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and countless others from taking to the streets and marching for an end to unnecessary police brutality. People on the street have no connection whatsoever to the leadership, and they have no connection to the BDS movement. And it's really important we separate out public opinion and the masses from a couple bad characters. The other thing we need to remember is to the extent that the BDS movement made gains, it wasn't by some secret or nefarious playbook. It's by a playbook that's very familiar to us, community relations. So how do we address this drift? And what can all this teach us about the ethnic studies fight? Well, we at JCRC are fully committed to advancing Jewish peoplehood across the Bay Area and tackling anti-Semitism and BDS wherever it might rear its head. But anti-Semitism is often a symptom of a sickness. And so we must address the sickness and not only the symptom. But these sicknesses are also things that put symptoms on other marginalized communities, namely the fraying fabric of our democracy, things like hyperpartisanship, preventing us from listening to each other, preventing us from coming up with long-term solutions. It's also about declining faith in our democratic institutions and an assault on voting rights. Second, it's about the rise of radical extremism and hate on the far right and the far left. In the 117th Congress that's about to be inaugurated, we now have members of Congress who openly oppose Israel's right to exist on one extreme, and we'll have members of Congress who openly embrace QAnon conspiracy theories against the Jewish community. Hate also takes forms of anti-Asian racism, like the rabbi mentioned, in light of COVID. It takes forms of police brutality, ICE deportations, and yes, bullying of Jewish students in our schools. And the last thing we share with our neighbors is a declining access, representation, and equity in education. COVID has laid bare the discrepancies in access between the haves and have-nots when it comes to education. This ethnic studies fight has made it clear as day that Jews are not being properly represented in the classroom. And also with this ethnic studies, that other minority communities are eager to tell their community's history, culture, and story on their own terms. But how do we make sure that we're under these issues, that we're addressing these underlying sicknesses? Well, we can't do it alone. We have to be in the relationship business in order to build a shared agenda with our neighbors. This is coalition building 101. But there's two crucial ingredients to successfully advancing this shared agenda. Number one, we have to build a robust Jewish public square across the Bay Area. And number two, we need to strengthen our relationships with our neighbors. We need both of these things before we can properly take action on the ills facing our democracy. So let's first talk about what we need to do inside of our own Jewish community. Here are some trend lines. It's clear we're all talking on Zoom. We're observing Shabbat on Zoom. COVID has made it harder for us as a Jewish community to connect and engage with each other. Everything's gone virtual, and the stay-at-home order makes everyone's lives much harder. Number two, the Bay Area is probably the least affiliated Jewish community with organized Jewish life. We need to capture those unengaged segments of the Jewish community, and particularly those that have historically felt disconnected. When I say that, I mean interfaith couples, Jews of color, LGBTQ Jews, and others that historically haven't had the same outlets and connections to our community. We also have to address the hyperpolarization inside of our community, not just in society at large. At JCRC, we bring together 50 member organizations, including Betham, which has been an incredible partner of ours for a very long time. And we try to build consensus and agreement on the policy areas that I just outlined for you. And importantly, no one of our 50 organizations has the capacity, resources, or man and woman power to tackle these deep-seated challenges alone. Our community has to come together despite our ideological, religious, and political differences. Another reason we need to come together as a Jewish community, there's an East Coast bias. 95% of Jewish advocacy takes place and is decided in New York and Washington, D.C. That's great, but the Bay Area has the most innovative Jewish community in the country. Our culture is different, our needs are different, And we are canary in the coal mine for all the issues that we talked about, especially ethnic studies, especially the BDS movement. These are things that we're experiencing first, and we need to be able, as a JCRC, but also as a community, to be able to relay these trends and our strategies to other parts of the country where it's going to come next, to a theater near them. And finally, all politics is local. This can't just be top down. These are grassroots movements that start at the local level and then spread to the state level and national. So do Rising Stars. You know, JCRC took people to Israel like Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, and London Breed before they were household names in San Francisco or Palo Alto, let alone California or the United States. We need to identify these people early. So once we come together as a Jewish community and build that public square, we need to build these strong and enduring friendships with our neighbors. It's the old saying, either you walk alone or you walk far, and we have to walk hand in hand with our neighbors. It's not enough to take a rising star on a trip to Israel. It's not enough to do an education training on anti-Semitism, because where have you been for me lately? You know, we need to make sure that our friends understand that we're there to show up for them too. And you can't build these relationships in a day. And you certainly can't start building those relationships when you need them. And we've been building these relationships with lay leaders and rabbis of Beth Am and all around the Bay Area for 75 years. And it's those relationships that allow us to take action on behalf of our community and the other issues in society that we care so deeply about. So we have to cultivate these relationships around mutual shared agendas. Again, that's protecting our democracy, advancing justice, advancing education. These are things that our neighbors care deeply about because it prevents the scapegoating of them, just like against us. Only by supporting one another can we build the trust to have their ear for the difficult conversations, such as, anti-Semitism works differently than other forms of oppression. Jews get charged with having too much privilege or too much influence. When a candidate loses office, whether it's a left-wing or right-wing candidate, they tend to blame it on Jewish billionaire instead of blaming it on money and politics. If you're a right-winger that loses, you blame it on George Soros. If you're a left-winger, you blame it on Sheldon Adelson. Or if you lose your primary, you blame it on, Michael Bloomberg in the middle. That's not okay. The problem is money and politics, not a Jewish stand-in for the problem. So we can't have those important conversations with our neighbors unless we build their trust and unless we develop these friendships. It's also conversations about how anti-Zionist Jews and nefarious organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace are being tokenized. They represent less than 2% of our Jewish community, if you look at the polls. Yet some of these progressive organizers are putting them in front and using them as excuse to saying, hey, I don't have anti-Semitic views. I don't have anti-Semitic policies. We can't have that deep and nuanced conversation with those leaders unless we build trust, unless we develop a shared agenda with them. So with those two ingredients in mind, a robust Bay Area Jewish public square and strong and enduring relationships with our neighbors, we can advance that shared agenda to protect ourselves and them. So with all that in mind, let's turn back to ethnic studies. The third draft came out 2 weeks ago, and there's been dramatic improvements. Thanks to a broad Jewish coalition, including Beth Am and activists and community members, we now have 2 Jewish American lesson plans. We now have robust definition of anti-Semitism, and mentions of BDS and anti-Semitic tropes have been removed. But there is more work to do. There's another public comment period coming in a week and a half, and I would like to kindly ask all of you as Beth Am congregants to participate in our upcoming action alert, as you so beautifully did a couple months ago, to make sure that these changes are affirmed. There are people trying to take it away from us. We're trying to put BDS in. We're trying to undermine having a definition of anti-Semitism. We have to keep our community's voice in the public square. We're optimistic that if we continue to fight together as one community, that we will have an okay outcome, one that represents our community fairly and allows these marginalized communities to tell their own story. But we won't be done, because then it goes from the state level to the district level. And there's 150 high school districts across the Bay Area alone. We're gonna need to organize. We're gonna need to identify Jewish parents. We're gonna need to identify Jewish teachers, and we're starting this process. We need to have parents and students speaking up to make sure that at a district level, that this is being implemented in a fair and inclusive way. We also need to continue developing relationships with leaders in public education. Before the November election, JCRC met with candidates for school boards in several prominent school districts to educate them about the ethnic studies issues and a lot of the bullying and swastikas and swastika graffiti that's been happening over the years in public high schools. And finally, we need to build relationships with the civic leaders in these ethnic communities who are trying to make their stories heard. We look forward to bringing them to Israel. We look forward to developing cooperation with them and fighting for equity and access in education, especially in light of COVID. So let me close with this, and I'm happy to take questions about any of this in the foyer after services conclude. For the first time in Jewish history, we have a strong Jewish and democratic state of Israel and a strong diaspora. But the condition that we have as a Jewish diaspora is that we're only secure when we are an integral part of the fabric of a pluralistic, educated, and just democratic society. And that all begins with building true friendships. We have to resist the urge right now, as hard as it is, to turn inward because things are scary. We have to stay in the relationship building. And I hope you'll join us. Thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Ty. That was excellent. And as Ty said, he has graciously agreed to join us in the foyer or the foyer, which will begin immediately following this service. So I hope you'll join us there. We'll have a breakout room for some Q&A with him. And we continue now with the Aleinu on page 282. Please rise.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. 287. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. The Kaddish is on page 294, and this setting is by Howard Schwartz. It's entitled Gathering the Sparks. Long before the sun cast a shadow, before the word was spoken that brought the heavens and the earth into being, a flame emerged from a single unseen point, and from the center of this flame, sparks of light sprang forth concealed in shells that set sail everywhere, above and below, like a fleet of ships, each carrying its cargo of light. Somehow, no one knows why, the frail vessels broke open, split asunder, and all the sparks were scattered like sand, like seed, like stars. That is why we were created, to search for the sparks no matter where they have been hidden, and as each one is revealed, to be consumed in our own fire and reborn out of our own ashes. Someday, when the sparks have been gathered, the vessels will be restored, and the fleet will set sail across another ocean of space, and the word will be spoken again. At this time, we remember those of our congregation and of its families who have died during the past week. Irene Rothstein, mother of Pam Bayer, Alfred Rothstein, Leon Rothstein, Mark Rothstein, Donna Rothstein, and Delalyn Hogan, grandmother of Paris and Nicholas Rothstein, Daniel and Madison Bayer, and Aurora Hogan. Jack Hagerup, father of Stephanie Seeger, grandfather of Henry and Emmett. Leanne Kirshner, mother of Paige Kaplan and grandmother of Abby, Zach, and Jake Kaplan. We add to their names the names of those who have died during the past month and whose families observe Shaloshim, the traditional 30-day period of mourning. John Sturp, Norman Rawson, Larry Burdo, Paul Dietken, Joseph Patrick James Daly, Holly Margulis, Rose Rinsky, Frida Kosman, and Lorraine Seelig. And we add to their names the names of those whose yard sites are commemorated this week. Dmitry Agurunov, Sheldon Boehm, Pesach Berenberg, Eleanor Bohmwald, Seymour Burson, Bertha Blank, Ethel Bloom, Gloria Boyarsky, Karen Osney Brownstein, John Brueggemann Sr., Catherine Busey, Selma Berger, Richard Chang, Julius Deutsch, Yevdokia Dobrusina, Margaret Lois Donsky, Mary Duchin, Louis Engel, Sidney Feinberg, Doris Feinberg, Bruce Fendel, Joseph Fogel, Mildred Fogel, Lucille Gaskill, Ray Gelbert, William Glickbarg, Ozias Goldenberg, Robert Greenwald, Jean Greenwald, Louis Grubber, Rhoda Grummett, Phyllis Hoffman, Mary Houston, Norm Jacoby, Esther Jones, Noreen Jordan, Thomas Kalb, Yaakov Kaplan, Julius Kowarski, Joseph Krefitz, Blanche Landau, Francis John Leonard, Jerome Levin, Anna Levin Ware, Darrell Lewis, Mendel Lertzman, Joan Morgenstern Sims, Marion Rothschild Netter, Robert Newman, Menashe Reuven, Sidney Richmond, Joseph Risner, Hattie Rockauer, Molly Rubenstein, Gabrielle Schwartz, Goldie Schulman, Edward Silver, Stanley Simon, Bertha Soffer, Joseph Taylor, Bella Waxman, Pauline White, Rose Wolfeld, and Abraham Wolfson. We join now together for the mourner's Kaddish, and if you are able, please rise. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, b'yalma divarach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yamechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'izman kari v'yamaru, amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'alam alamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran bi'alma v'yamaru, amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru, amen.
Shalom b'mromav, hu
couple of announcements before we conclude our service. This month, we are collecting tzedakah for Learning Home Volunteers, which is a nonprofit organization working to address the kindergarten readiness gap by providing weekly in-home tutoring to preschool-age children. Learning Home Volunteers also gives books to families to develop their home library of children's books. And we invite your financial support for Learning Home Volunteers, but also Learning Home Volunteers is looking for volunteers. And so you can become a tutor. All the tutoring happens on Zoom. So if you're looking for a way to get engaged as we're all sitting at home and being confined in our houses, this is a wonderful way for you to contribute to the life of someone else and to help a kid. And so you can find out more about Learning Home Volunteers on our website, and I do hope that you'll get involved. As I mentioned earlier, the foyer will begin immediately following this service. You can join us there. As you see on your screen, there is the link to the Zoom room for the foyer. You can also find it on our website. And Ty will be joining us there as well, so that we'll have an opportunity to ask questions of him and of the work of the JCRC. So I hope to see you there. We conclude now with the singing of Od Yavo. Cantor, take it away.
All right, ready? Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu.